The world is full of noise, of connections, of digital footprints. We leave a trail of data with every card swipe, a ghost image on every security camera we pass. It feels, in our modern age, impossible to simply cease to be. And yet, it happens. People, living ordinary lives, step out of frame. They walk around a corner and into nothingness. They drive down a road that, for them, has no end. These are not stories of fugitives with elaborate plans or adventurers lost to the wilderness they sought to conquer. These are stories of the void that can open up in the middle of a mundane Tuesday, on a festive Christmas Eve, or during a night out with friends. They are the stories of individuals who vanished, leaving behind a chilling silence and a tapestry of questions so tangled that even decades of searching cannot unpick a single thread. Tonight, we will step into that silence. We will reconstruct the final known moments of 5 individuals who disappeared without a trace, examining the baffling clues and the impossible circumstances that have left investigators, families, and amateur sleuths grasping at shadows. These are the cases that defy explanation, the ones that remind us that sometimes the most terrifying mystery is not what happened, but the fact that we may never know. Our first journey into the unexplained takes us back to Christmas Eve, 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sodder family, George, Jenny, and 9 of their 10 children, were settling in for the night. The older children, Marion, Maurice, Martha, Louis, and Jenny, had convinced their mother to let them stay up late to play with new toys that Marion had bought them from her job. The youngest 4, Betty, Joan, George Jr., and Sylvia, were already asleep. Their father, George, and 2 of the older sons, John and Joe, had already gone to bed after a long day of work. It was a scene of domestic holiday warmth, soon to be shattered by an unimaginable catastrophe. Around 1 a.m. on Christmas morning, a phone call woke Jenny Sodder. The voice on the other end was a woman she didn't know, asking for a name she didn't recognize. Jenny told the caller they had the wrong number and heard the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background before the line went dead. Dismissing it as a simple mistake, she returned to bed, but as she did, she noticed that the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. The children who had stayed up were normally diligent about these chores. Assuming they had simply forgotten in their excitement, she switched off the lights, locked the door, and fell back asleep. Just 30 minutes later, she was jolted awake again, this time by the smell of smoke. A fire had broken out in George's office, near the front of their 2-story timber frame house. The family scrambled to escape. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and Joe, made it out. But upstairs, in the attic rooms where they slept, were Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. Panic set in. George rushed back to the house to rescue them, but the main staircase was already a raging inferno. His thoughts immediately turned to his work ladder, which he always kept propped against the side of the house. He ran to get it, but it was gone. It wasn't just misplaced, it had vanished from its usual spot. Desperate, George tried to drive one of his 2 coal trucks up to the house to climb onto the roof and access the 2nd-story windows, but neither truck would start, despite having worked perfectly the previous day. Frantic and helpless, the surviving Sodders could only watch as their home, and everything they believed was inside it, was consumed by flames and collapsed into its basement. The call to the fire department was just as fraught with bizarre obstacles. A neighbor had to run to a nearby tavern to use the phone because the Sodders' own phone line was dead. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, was unable to operate the fire engine's pumper truck. He claimed he didn't know how, so another firefighter had to take over. By the time the fire department arrived at 8 a.m., 7 hours after the blaze began, the Sodder home was nothing but a smoking pile of ash and rubble. The assumption was tragic but simple. The 5 children had perished in the fire. But as the investigation began, the simple explanation started to unravel. A cursory search of the basement ash yielded no bones, no teeth, no human remains of any kind. The fire chief suggested the blaze had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. But a local crematorium employee disputed this, stating that human bones would have remained even after a 2-hour cremation at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Sodder house fire had burned for less than an hour before collapsing. This was the first crack in the official story, and for George and Jenny Sodder, it was the beginning of a lifelong crusade. They began to question everything about that night. Why were their phone lines cut? Who made that strange phone call? Where was the missing ladder, which was later found tossed into a nearby embankment? Why wouldn't their trucks start? George Sodder, an Italian immigrant who was outspokenly critical of Benito Mussolini, had been the target of threats in the past. An insurance salesman had once warned him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed because of his anti-Mussolini remarks. Another visitor, looking for work, had pointed to the fuse boxes and warned that they would one day cause a fire. George had dismissed these as idle threats at the time, but now they seemed chillingly prescient. The family hired a private investigator, C.C. Tinsley, who uncovered more disturbing details. He was told by the fire chief, F.J. Morris, that he had found a heart in the ashes, which he had secretly buried in a metal box. When the box was exhumed, the heart was revealed to be a fresh beef liver, untouched by fire. It seemed like a deliberate attempt to placate the family and close the case. The Sodders became convinced their children had not died in the fire, but had been abducted, with the fire set as a diversion. They erected a large, haunting billboard along Route 16, featuring photos of the 5 missing children and offering a reward for information. For the rest of their lives, they followed every lead. There were sightings. A woman who ran a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed to have served the children breakfast on Christmas morning, noting a car with Florida license plates in the parking lot. A woman at a Charleston hotel saw 4 of the 5 children a week after the fire, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction. Years later, in the 1960s, a letter arrived, postmarked from Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid-20s who bore a striking resemblance to their son Louis. On the back was a cryptic message: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill boys, a 90132 or 35. The family hired another detective to investigate the lead, but he disappeared after taking their money. George and Jenny Sodder passed away, never knowing the fate of their children, but the remaining family members never gave up hope. The billboard stood for over 40 years, a silent testament to a family's enduring love and an impenetrable mystery. Were the children taken by the Sicilian mafia as retribution for George's political views? Did they somehow survive and choose never to return? Or did 5 young lives simply turn to ash on a cold Christmas morning, leaving behind nothing but ghosts and unanswered questions? From a historical tragedy, we jump forward to the digital age, to a case that hinges on a single, impossible piece of surveillance footage. It was March 31st, 2006. Brian Shaffer, a 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State University, was on the cusp of a bright future. He was a responsible and dedicated student, deeply in love with his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, a fellow medical student whom he planned to propose to during a trip to Miami they had scheduled for the following week. But Brian's life had also been touched by tragedy. His mother had recently died of cancer, a loss that hit him hard. On this Friday night, with spring break having just begun, Brian's father, Randy, came to Columbus for dinner. The two had a steak dinner together, a normal, pleasant evening. After his father left, Brian met up with his friend, William Clint Florence. Their plan was to have a few drinks to celebrate the start of their vacation. They started at a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona, located on the second floor of the South Campus Gateway complex. The night progressed as a typical bar crawl. They had a few drinks, met up with one of Clint's friends, Meredith Reed, who gave them a ride to another bar, and continued their evening. Sometime after midnight, they returned to the Ugly Tuna Saloona for a final round of drinks. This is where the timeline becomes both crystal clear and utterly incomprehensible. The entrance to the Ugly Tuna was monitored by a single security camera positioned above the top of the escalator that served as the bar's only public entrance and exit. At 1:15 a.m. on April 1st, the camera captures Brian, Clint, and Meredith riding the escalator up and entering the bar. For the next 40 minutes, Brian is seen on camera inside the bar, chatting with his friends and other patrons. At 1:55 a.m., the footage shows Brian talking to two young women just outside the main entrance, then casually turning and walking back into the bar, out of the camera's view. This is the last time Brian Shaffer was ever seen. Around 2 a.m., the bar prepared to close. Clint and Meredith waited for Brian near the top of the escalator. When he didn't appear, they assumed he had slipped out without saying goodbye and gone back to his apartment. They called his phone several times over the weekend, but the calls went straight to voicemail. It wasn't until Monday morning, when Brian missed his flight to Miami, that the alarm was truly raised. Alexis Wagoner and Randy Shaffer frantically tried to contact him, to no avail. They reported him missing. The police investigation began at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The first and most crucial step was to review the security tapes, and that's when the mystery solidified. Investigators watched every second of the footage from the time Brian re-entered the bar at 1:55 a.m. until well after it had closed. They saw every single person who was in the bar that night leave via the escalator. They saw Clint and Meredith. They saw the two women Brian had spoken with. They saw the bartenders and the bouncers. They did not see Brian Shaffer. He was recorded entering, but he was never recorded leaving. The implications were staggering. The building complex was a new construction, and police were confident there were no other ways out. The only other exit was a service door that led to a messy, difficult-to-navigate construction area, a route investigators deemed highly improbable for someone to use, especially without being noticed. Yet they searched the area meticulously. They brought in sniffer dogs. They went through dumpsters and sewer lines. Every person who was in the bar that night was identified from the footage and questioned, including the two women Brian was last seen speaking with. No one had any information. Clint Florence, the last friend to see him, took a polygraph test, but the results were reported as inconclusive. The police explored every possibility. Could Brian have changed his clothes or put on a hat to disguise himself and walk out unnoticed? Investigators painstakingly reviewed the footage, comparing every departing patron to the known images of Brian. They found no matches. Theories began to swirl, each more unsettling than the last. The foul play theory suggests that Brian was killed inside the bar, perhaps in an altercation, and his body was somehow removed from the premises, bypassing the camera. This would have required the complicity of bar staff and an incredible amount of luck to avoid detection, especially through the only non-public exit, which opened onto a busy street. Another theory posits that Brian, grieving his mother and perhaps stressed about his future, decided to walk away from his life. His supporters find this impossible to believe. He was excelling in his studies, he was about to get engaged, and he left his car parked at his apartment and his passport and all his credit cards behind. He even left a contact lens case soaking on his bathroom counter, a small, intimate detail suggesting he intended to return. The most bizarre theory, and one that gained traction online, is the smiley face killer theory, which links the disappearances of numerous young men found drowned in bodies of water to a hypothetical serial killer or gang. However, no body has ever been found, and there is no concrete evidence to support this. Brian's father, Randy, dedicated the rest of his life to finding his son, but in a cruel twist of fate, he was killed in a freak accident in 2008 when a tree fell on him during a storm. With his death, the most passionate advocate for the investigation was gone. The case remains open but cold, frozen at 1:55 a.m. on April 1st, 2006. Brian Shaffer walked into a bar, and, as far as the world knows, he never walked out. Our next case involves not one, but 5 individuals, and a series of decisions so baffling they defy all logic. This is the story of the Yuba County 5. On the evening of February 24th, 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City, California, piled into a turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. They were Gary Mathias, 25, Bill Sterling, 29, Jack Hewitt, 24, Ted Wire, 32, and Jack Madruga, 30. The men were close friends, bound together by a shared love of sports and their participation in a day program for adults with mild intellectual disabilities or psychiatric conditions. They were affectionately known in their community as the Boys. Their destination that night was a college basketball game at California State University, Chico, about 50 miles north of Yuba City. They were diehard fans, and their team, the UC Davis Aggies, were playing in a tournament. After the game, which ended around 10 p.m., they were seen stopping at a local market to buy snacks and drinks: a Hostess cherry pie, a Langendorf lemon pie, a Snickers bar, a Marathon bar, and cartons of milk and Pepsi. This mundane purchase would become a key detail in the mystery. They were expected home that night. When they didn't return, their families were immediately concerned. It was completely out of character for them to stay out without calling. A police investigation was launched, but days turned into a week with no sign of the men or the car. Then, on February 28th, a forest ranger made a strange discovery. High up in the Plumas National Forest, on a remote, unpaved mountain road, sat Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego. It was stuck in a snowdrift, but it was undamaged and operable. The location was confounding. It was 70 miles from Chico, far off any logical route back to Yuba City. The road was treacherous, accessible only to 4-wheel drive vehicles in the winter, and the men had driven up it as far as they could before getting stuck. Inside the car, the candy bar wrappers and empty drink cartons from their stop in Chico were found. The keys were gone. There was a quarter tank of gas, more than enough to have turned around and sought help. The car showed no signs of a struggle. It was simply abandoned. The discovery of the car only deepened the mystery. Why had they driven up this remote, snow-covered logging road in the middle of the night? Jack Madruga, the driver, was known to be cautious and hated the cold. His family insisted he would never have taken his prized car on such a road voluntarily. Gary Mathias, who had a history of schizophrenia but was on medication, was the only one with a driver's license besides Madruga, but he wasn't known to drive Madruga's car. Search parties were dispatched, but a severe snowstorm blanketed the area, halting efforts and burying any potential tracks or evidence under several feet of snow. For months, there was nothing. The families waited in agony. The thaw finally came in June, and with it, a series of grim discoveries. On June 4th, a group of motorcyclists exploring a trail stumbled upon a Forest Service trailer at a remote campsite nearly 20 miles from where the car had been abandoned. The window of the trailer had been broken. Inside, they found the emaciated body of Ted Wire. He was lying on a bed, wrapped in 8 sheets, as if his friends had tried to keep him warm. His shoes were missing. On a table beside him were his wallet, his watch, and a nickel ring. An autopsy revealed he had starved to death, despite a locker in the same trailer being full of enough canned food to have sustained all 5 men for a year. The cans had been opened, but only with a P38 can opener, a type used by the military. This was significant because both Madruga and Matthias had served in the army and would have known how to use one. Wire, however, would not have. Perhaps most disturbingly, Wire's feet were severely frostbitten, and he had lost an estimated 100 pounds. He had survived for an astonishing 8 to 13 weeks after the men first disappeared, slowly starving in a cabin full of food. The discovery of Wire's body relaunched the search. The next day, the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found about 11 miles from the car, on opposite sides of the road. Madruga had been partially consumed by animals. Sterling's bones were scattered over a small area. It appeared they had died of hypothermia. 2 days later, Jack Hewitt's father, who had joined the search, found his son's spine under a manzanita bush, just a short distance from the trailer. His skull was found nearby. His cause of death was also exposure. But what of the 5th man, Gary Matthias? His tennis shoes were found inside the trailer, suggesting he had been there with Wire. Why would he take Wire's leather shoes and leave his own more comfortable sneakers behind? No trace of Gary Matthias has ever been found. The questions are endless. Why did they abandon a perfectly good car? What prompted them to travel 20 miles on foot, uphill, through deep snow, in the dead of winter? Once they found the trailer, why did they not use the abundant supply of food and fuel for the propane tank to stay warm? And what happened to Gary Matthias? Did he lead the group on this bizarre, fatal journey? Did he succumb to the elements somewhere in the vast wilderness, his body never to be found? Or did he, somehow, survive and walk away? The Yuba County Five walked away from a basketball game and into a mystery as cold and vast as the mountain that claimed them. The next case is profoundly unsettling because it involves a child, a 9-year-old girl, who seemingly made a conscious decision to walk out of her home and into a storm. This is the disappearance of Asha Degree. Asha was a bright, cautious, and somewhat shy 4th grader, living with her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, and her older brother, O'Brien, in Shelby, North Carolina. By all accounts, she was a happy child from a loving, stable home. She was a good student, a talented basketball player on her school team, and deeply afraid of the dark. This fear makes what happened on Valentine's Day of 2000 all the more inexplicable. The weekend had been normal. On Saturday, Asha lost a basketball game, a loss that left her visibly upset, crying with her teammates. But by the next day, she seemed to have bounced back, attending church and visiting relatives with her family. On Sunday night, February 13th, the children went to bed in the room they shared around 8 p.m. A powerful storm was raging outside, with heavy rain and strong winds. At around 2:30 a.m. on Monday, Harold Degree got up and checked on his children. He saw both Asha and O'Brien asleep in their beds. He checked again around 4 a.m. before going to bed himself, but this time he only saw his son. He assumed Asha had simply moved to her own bed in the room. When Aquila Degree woke up a few hours later to get the children ready for school, she found O'Brien in his bed, but Asha was gone. A frantic search of the house revealed that the front door was unlocked, and some of Asha's favorite belongings were missing. Her book bag, packed with a change of clothes and personal items, her wallet, and a t-shirt featuring the band New Kids on the Block. The family immediately called the police. An intense search began, but the storm had washed away any potential tracks. The first credible lead came quickly. Several motorists driving along Highway 18 between 3:30 a.m. and 4:15 a.m. reported seeing a small girl in a white t-shirt and white pants walking south along the shoulder of the road. It was Asha. One driver, finding the sight so unusual, turned his truck around and circled back 3 times. On his final pass, he saw her run off the road and into the woods when she saw his vehicle approaching. This was the last confirmed sighting of Asha Degree. The investigation uncovered no reason for her to run away. Her parents described her as content and not the type of child to do something so drastic. She had no computer and limited access to the internet at the time, making the theory of her being lured by an online predator less likely. Why would a 9-year-old who was scared of dogs and the dark pack a bag and deliberately walk out into a violent thunderstorm in the middle of the night? The contents of her bag offered few clues. It contained a copy of the book, The Whipping Boy, by Sid Fleischman, a story about a prince and an orphan who run away, which she had recently checked out from her school library. Was she inspired by the story? Or was it just a book she happened to be reading? For 1.5 years, the case went cold. Then, in August 2001, a construction worker digging at a building site in Burke County, about 26 miles north of where Asha was last seen, made a startling discovery. He unearthed a black plastic trash bag. Inside was Asha's book bag. It contained her name and phone number, but the other items she had packed were gone. In their place were the book McElligot's Pool by Dr. Seuss, which did not belong to her or her school library, and a t-shirt from a concert by the band New Kids on the Block, which also did not belong to her. The discovery was bizarre. The bag was double wrapped, suggesting someone had taken care to protect it. The location was also strange. It was in the opposite direction of where she was seen walking. This finding confirmed that foul play was almost certainly involved. Someone else had handled that bag. In the years since, the FBI has joined the investigation, and new leads have emerged, though none have solved the case. In 2018, the FBI released new details, revealing that they were seeking information about a specific vehicle of interest, a dark green, early 1970s Lincoln Continental, Mark IV or a Ford Thunderbird from the same era. Witnesses may have seen Asha getting into such a car on the night she disappeared. The FBI also re-released information about the 2 library books found in the vicinity of the case, The Whipping Boy and McElligot's Pool. They believe someone may remember checking these books out or having conversations about them around that time. The central question remains: what motivated Asha to leave her home? Was she sleepwalking, a theory her parents have considered? Was she coerced or lured out by someone she knew and trusted? Or was she attempting to run away for some unknown reason, only to fall victim to an opportunistic predator who saw a small child walking alone on a dark highway? 20 years later, Asha Degree's family still holds a walk every year to keep her memory alive, still waiting for an answer that will explain why their daughter walked out into the storm and never came home. Our final case is perhaps the most chillingly modern, a story of paranoia and panic captured on video for the entire world to see. It is the disappearance of Lars Mittank. In July 2014, 28-year-old Lars from Germany was vacationing with friends in Golden Sands, a seaside resort in Bulgaria. It was a typical young men's holiday, filled with sun, bars, and beaches. The trip was unremarkable until the very end. Lars, a passionate fan of the Werder Bremen football club, got into a disagreement with a group of other German tourists over football. The argument escalated into a physical fight, and Lars was struck in the head, resulting in a ruptured eardrum and a possible jaw injury. A doctor advised him not to fly due to the risk of complications from the pressure changes, so his friends flew home as scheduled while Lars stayed behind to recover. He checked into a cheap hotel near the Varna airport, the hotel color, to wait until he was cleared to travel. This is when his behavior took a sharp and terrifying turn. Alone in a foreign country, injured, and staying in a notoriously rough part of town, Lars began to exhibit signs of extreme paranoia. He called his mother, Sandra Mittank, in a frantic state. He whispered on the phone, telling her that he was being followed by 4 men who wanted to rob or kill him. He said he had hidden in a bush to escape them. He told her to cancel his credit cards. At one point during the call, he abruptly said, "They're coming," and the line went dead. Later, he sent her a text message asking about the antibiotics he had been prescribed, cefuroxime 500, questioning what they were for. His mother, thousands of miles away, was helpless and terrified. She booked him a flight home for the next day and arranged for him to take a bus or a taxi to the airport. The next morning, Lars took a taxi to Varna airport. He called his mother again, telling her that he had made it to the terminal. He sounded more relaxed, and Sandra felt a wave of relief. He was about to come home. Inside the airport, Lars went to see the airport doctor for a final checkup before his flight. A witness who was in the waiting room later described Lars as visibly agitated and nervous. What happened next was witnessed by the doctor and captured in its entirety by the airport's security cameras. According to the doctor, Lars was initially calm during the examination. But when a man dressed as an airport construction worker entered the room, Lars completely panicked. He jumped up and began to tremble, muttering, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." He then bolted from the medical office, leaving behind all of his belongings, his wallet, his cell phone, his passport, and his luggage. The airport's CCTV footage then captures what happened next, and the images are profoundly disturbing. Lars is seen sprinting at full speed through the airport terminal, a look of sheer terror on his face. He runs past the check-in counters and out the main entrance. He doesn't stop. He continues running across the parking lot, climbs a 2.5-meter-high barbed wire fence surrounding the airport perimeter with surprising agility, and disappears into a dense, sprawling sunflower field on the other side. This was the last time anyone ever saw Lars Mittank. An extensive search of the field and the surrounding area, which included a river and difficult terrain, turned up nothing. Theories abound, each attempting to explain his bizarre behavior. One theory is that the fight had caused more than just a ruptured eardrum. He may have sustained an undiagnosed head injury that led to a psychotic break, causing hallucinations and severe paranoia. Another possibility is that the antibiotic he was prescribed, cefuroxime, while not commonly known to cause psychiatric side effects, could have had a rare adverse reaction, especially if mixed with alcohol. A darker theory suggests that Lars's fears were real. Golden Sands is known for its organized crime. Perhaps the men he fought with were more dangerous than he realized, and they or their associates truly were hunting him. In this scenario, the construction worker who entered the doctor's office may have been one of them, prompting Lars's desperate flight. But why would they hunt him down over a bar fight? And if they did catch him, what happened to his body? Finally, there is the theory of voluntary disappearance. Overwhelmed by some unknown personal crisis, did Lars stage the entire event to start a new life? This seems unlikely, given he left all his identification and money behind. The video of his final moments has been viewed millions of times online, making him one of the most famous missing persons in the world. But fame has brought no answers. Lars Mittank ran from something, real or imagined, with such terror that he vaulted a fence and vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind only a haunting video and a family desperate for an explanation that will likely never come. From a family lost to fire, to a student who walked into a bar and never left, to a group of friends on a fatal detour, a child who walked into a storm, and a tourist who ran into a field of sunflowers. These stories are more than just unsolved case files. They are reminders of a fragile boundary between the known and the unknown. They show us how quickly the fabric of a normal life can be torn, leaving a hole that can never be mended. For the families left behind, the pain is compounded by the not knowing. It is a wound that cannot heal, a constant, low-frequency hum of uncertainty that underlies every moment of their lives. The search for answers becomes a life's work, a pilgrimage with no destination. While we, as observers, are drawn to the puzzle and the thrill of the mystery, it is their reality. These are not characters in a story. They were people with futures, with loved ones, with plans for the next day that never came. And so, while we theorize and debate, we must also remember the human cost of these impenetrable silences. The greatest tribute we can pay them is to not forget, to keep asking the questions, and to acknowledge the unsettling truth that some doors, once opened, may never be closed. Some people simply disappear, and we are left behind, staring into the void.